Hi, everyone. My name is Milo Cook. I'm the executive director here in Shattuck. And this morning I am with Vanessa Chauhan, one of our board members, to talk about the findings in our 2022-2023 annual report. Welcome, Vanessa.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
So we have a lot of content in the annual report, but because of the format, both in the printed and the annual and the digital version on our website, there's so much more, so much data that we could not fit in. And so we are here together this morning to dig a little bit deeper into the data to try to share with you all the context in which this data stands so that we can make more meaning from the information that we have. So I'm curious to know from your perspective, Vanessa, what are some things that you're curious about?
I'm curious about learning more about the work that you're doing on the ground, right? I'm curious to hear about what success has looked like so far for the organization. I'm curious about how you're partnering with organizations on the ground and what that work actually looks like. And then I'm also really excited about what's next and what to look forward to as we continue to do this important work.
Yeah, absolutely. So where would you like to start?
So many questions. All right, let's get started. So the India map on page 2, that highlights where Shattuck's partners were located in 2022. Since then, Shattuck's reach on this map seems to have expanded farther to reach 3 new states in the northeast of India and in the south. Mm-hmm. Talk about why Shattuck chooses to work in these regions specifically.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think that the impetus for us to really zero in on priority populations and priority states came from the simple fact that Shattuck is a small grant maker. We're not a huge foundation. The size of our grants are relatively modest. They are $20,000 in unrestricted program support for each of our partners per year. And so it was important for us to, with that reality, for us to really think about where we would make the most difference. Where could we go that had the most need? And so in 2021, we actually did a cross-country analysis looking at learning levels as well as indicators of gender equality across the country and across populations. And it really helped us focus in the Northeast where there isn't as much support and it's harder to reach to. It's also a very different ethnic and racial making or makeup, and then to go further in the South too. And then in terms of population, it was very clear to us that the LGBTQIA plus youth population, the scheduled caste and scheduled tribes communities were in, and then religious minorities were underserved and underrepresented at the national level and in the mainstream feminist movements. And so we became much more targeted with the partners that we wanted to seek and support with the so that we could really build a pipeline of young leaders coming from these underrepresented and underserved communities to get a formal college degree, to become financially independent and to be part of these big, important conversations at the national level and to be able to represent their communities for themselves.
Great. Did you experience any challenges as you were seeking out partners? Did you find that the states that you were looking to work in and expand your reach in, that there were there was a good infrastructure in place on the partner level?
I think that I think that that's actually, it touches on a number of different things. One thing is that it is a complete, in the Northeast, it is a completely different, and so immediately you feel like you're in a different context. And then the more time you spend there, the more you realize that while the outcomes for the young women in school and in their professional lives are comparable to other parts in India, in the central states of India, or in the northern states of India, right? We see high rates of girl dropout in schools. We see a very small enrollment of young women in college, etc. And then their participation in the formal work sector is similar to other places in India as well. The reasons behind those outcomes are actually quite different, because when you are in the communities in the Northeast and you talk about the rights of a girl to access schooling, there's no question about that. Everyone agrees, right? Everyone says, of course, our boys and our girls should have the same rights to be able to go to school. The reason why we don't send our girls is because of poverty, and that's common it's a common factor in other states as well. But one big reason that's different in the Northeast is that there's still open conflict, armed conflict that has pushed a lot of people into moving out of their communities and out of the states. And so the general level of insecurity is a big factor for people not wanting to send their girls to school. And so all of that creates just a lot of instability that may not exist in other parts of India. Another big reason why people do not send their girls to school is the fact that the infrastructure for higher ed is more scarce in the Northeast. You have to travel further to be able to access colleges and universities. And then just the landscape, the fact that it's a lot of mountains makes it just a lot harder for people to be able to travel long distances. And so while the outcomes for girls and women when it comes to their school, their college and employment opportunities may look the same as the outcomes in other parts of the country, the root causes are actually quite different. And that realization is further confirmation that the fact that Shataka works in with our partners to lead our efforts, to trust them with unrestricted funds so that they can really tailor the solutions to the root causes in their local context, is further confirmed by how diverse different parts of India looks like.
That's so interesting. Thank you for explaining. I think it builds on to the next question. So on page 3, there's a quote that says 50% of the 2022 graduates have secured a job or internship after graduation, compared to 63% of the 2021 graduates, and nearly 20% of 2022 graduates are working to support their families.
Mm-hmm.
Shataka will roll out its Ready for Work initiative in 2023 to improve job readiness and job placement for Shataka graduates. Why is continued support like this so essential? And considering that there's so many different dynamics at play and so many different nuances and distinctions across the states and the regions and even the populations, what kind of additional considerations had to go into developing these programs?
Mm-hmm.
And then just to add further, what is the data revealing about the employment opportunities for young women graduates in India?
Yeah. So I would bring us back to what the scholars and the graduates tell us themselves. We try to have ongoing contacts and touch points with these young women to really be able to understand what their reality is, and so that we can pivot and design our programs and our grant making to meet those needs as they change and evolve and as we learn. And I think one recurring piece of feedback that we've received from our graduates is the fact that it continues to be really hard for them to be able to integrate the formal sector the way that we hope they can with a college degree. And so the Ready for Work initiative has been a long time in the making. It's really an effort to support them, our graduates, to come to go from having a college degree in their back pocket and actually being able to get their first job in the formal jobs sector, which we know is a building block for them to be able to continue to move up in their professional careers. So that was really the impetus for it. And what we have learned so far is that even with a college degree, these young women, because of their identity and the communities that they come from, continue to face compounding effects of discrimination on the basis of race, caste, religion, also language, because many of these young women come from parts of the country where Hindi is not as widely spoken as you might think. And that once again goes back to just how diverse of a country India is in all senses of the word. And then when you look at the numbers between 2021 and 2022, you see a 10% decrease in our graduates being able to get a job or an internship upon graduation from college. What that tells us is that we're still living in the aftermath of the pandemic. We know that during the pandemic, there was tremendous loss in employment. And so as the whole world is finally coming out of the pandemic, they're finding a job continues to be really hard. And being someone completely new on the job market, you're not competing with people who have a lot more experience, who have also lost their job. And so the competition is really fierce for these young women, in addition to the discrimination that I just mentioned that they are facing. It's that much more difficult for them to find a job. However, this year, being able to see that 20% of them contributes towards their household income tells us everything about the way that these young women operate as well. That as much as we put a lot of emphasis on investing in the individual girl, these young women do not exist in isolation. They often continue to live at home, which is very common until they get married or are in a financial position to live independently. But these young women come from really difficult economic circumstances. And so the hope and the support that they've received from their parents to pursue a college degree is also stems from the idea that once they get a job, they'll be able to help at home, right? This is the family's ticket out of chronic poverty and marginalization. And we see that when in the numbers that 20% of the young women who are indeed working contribute to their family's income.
So you talked a little bit about post-pandemic world. Like, are you noticing that there's a little bit more flexibility just in the types of jobs that are also available? Is India moving back into in-person? Everything is mostly in person, or are you seeing sort of these hybrid models also being introduced? And potentially increasing opportunities in that regard?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think that this is my own opinion, but I think that the pandemic in a lot of ways hit the global north and the global south in very different ways. And one difference is that the global south has seen really hard disasters in terms of illnesses, but also natural disasters, and the fact that their infrastructures may not be as strong or as resilient as it may be in the global north. And so I say that because traveling to India and asking people about how they are re-entering the pandemic after the pandemic into like some kind of normalcy, what I hear a lot is that they sort of knew how to react because this is not the first time that they're hit with a really big disaster that paralyzes parts of the country or their communities. But then also what I hear a lot is we're back, we've been back. And now it's not how do we protect ourselves from COVID, but how do we live with it, right? And I think that it really stems from a place of survival, that there's no other option. What are they going to do? Sit home and not find a job and not go to school? That's not an option, right? And so there's a lot of strength and resilience that comes with that determination of just like, we have to get out and we have to survive. The other thing that I would say is that people have also embraced more remote ways of working, of learning, and of being with one another because of the pandemic. And so I think that what it has highlighted is that there's a huge gender digital gap that exists around the globe, but is very deep in India in terms of how many young women has access to that technology, feels comfortable with that technology. And because of the pandemic, there has been a tremendous amount of learning and to become much more comfortable with digital technology and digital devices. What we've done at Shataka in order to be able to respond to that is to provide computers and a technology package to each and every one of our scholars so that they have that opportunity to learn in a safe way, to be able to access schooling that may be outside of the area where they're comfortable or can travel. And then for them to also stay in touch with one another, to be able to provide a new channel for them to be able to receive and that peer support, to be there for one another, and then to be able to access potential resources outside of their community. And so it's been amazing to watch the scholars, but also the partners really take some new learnings from the pandemic and then apply it in their ongoing everyday programming and activities.
And that also feeds into the Ready to Work initiative, I'm assuming, because you know, it bleeds into resume building, interacting in virtual spaces, learning from the plethora of resources that are available online. So. And
it's an additional skill that they can add in their resume too, right? That they are comfortable with Microsoft Suite, that they're comfortable using a computer, that they can type, all of that.
So on page 9, you know, talk about family-centric, intergenerational, action-based training curricula, which are key to success. This was a quote from a Shataka partner who's engaged in the Men Against Gender-Based Violence initiative. Some of the data in the report highlights the reach of this program within different demographic groups, such as young men, their family members, and boys, and even their teachers in schools. Why is this so important, and why is this model? Talk a little bit about this model and why it's so important to the work that Shadika is doing.
Yeah, thanks for that question, because it gives me an opportunity to really highlight how much we've learned with this Men Against Gender-Based Violence initiative since it started in 2019. It's been 3 years in the making, and a 3-year pilot working with men and boys to champion more gender affirming behaviors and attitudes in communities outside of Varanasi, but also for them to be able to be better at identifying, to have the tools and the language to be able to identify gender-based violence in all of its forms in the communities, and then to be part of the solution. And what we've learned after the first year of the pilot was that the young men in their early 20s, late teens, early 20s, were the fastest adopters of of gender affirming language and behaviors. However, when they would go, because the curriculum is an action-based curriculum, when they would go out and behave in different ways, or speak in different ways, or correct negative behaviors, they would get a lot of pushback. And the first place where they would get pushback was at home from elder men, who would question their masculinity, their ability to lead a family, because they were changing their language and they were changing their behaviors, and they were offering to help with domestic chores, and they were advocating on behalf of their mothers or their sisters. And so in year 2 of the pilot, then we started to support these family-centric activities where the curriculum would be shared not just with these young men, but also with fathers and uncles who lived at home with them. And we've seen tremendous transformation, one between the fathers and the sons, where they can actually have something constructive to bond over, but also in these older men, for them to change their own behaviors and change their own language, and being able to give more space for the women and girls in their homes. And so we've seen a big number of women from these families who are part of the family-centric programming, saying that they feel a lot safer at home and that they have more time to dedicate to other things outside of just domestic chores. And then we also created peer accountability pairs, where these young men would come together and share kind of what they learned, debate the questions, but also provide courage and inspiration to one another if they had received pushback from their friends or from other places in the community, to be able to come together and being able to say, hey, I saw you behave in that way. What happened? How can we correct it? How can I support you? And then in year 3, last year in 2022, what our partners observed is that a lot of these young men still spend a lot of time during the day at school. And what that means is that this was a space where they would experience pushback, but where they would also be exposed to other adults behaving in a way that was counter to what they were learning and trying to champion themselves. And so it was a priority then for the partners to create to tailor the curriculum that they already had, to be able to deliver it into the schools, so that in a space where these young men spend, 2/3 of their day, it would actually be an environment where people would celebrate and would affirm this change in behaviors and attitudes towards other genders, rather than push back and make them feel bad or guilty or ashamed for wanting to be change makers. And so after 3 years of pilot, the Men Against Gender Violence initiative has now quite a sophisticated, integrated solution at the community level that's proving to be really, really effective and really inspiring.
Wow, that's such like transformational work. It's happening, cultural shifts, mindset shifts, and it's adding a whole allyship network to the work that's being done. I think it's so great.
And I think it continues to highlight once again that working with the individuals is so important, right? To be able to teach them strength and resilience, to be able to give them language, to be able to express themselves, but that work can't have an impact in isolation, right? That there needs to be a much bigger, integrated, all-encompassing solution to be able to really make the changes that we want to see.
And it's really promising to see that young boys and young men, are engaged in this, because, this is sort of a good litmus test for, good things to come, because we're sort of starting early. We're engaging the leaders, the generation of the future, and they're impacting their elders. So, it's great to see just all of the different dimensions of this.
Yeah, and I want to come back to something that I said just a little bit earlier, in like the fathers being able to express to us that this is the first time that working on this curriculum with their sons, they have something to talk about. Because what we forget is that patriarchy and what it demands of men is actually quite isolating, right? That they have to repress their emotions, their feelings, that only some things are appropriate to talk, not to discuss, and then some things are not. And it results in relationships between father and sons to be quite transactional. And so to be able to see these fathers and these sons come out of that isolation, to be able to talk to one another and share some of the struggles that they have, to be able to express themselves, to be able to share their feelings, is actually quite powerful. And so it's an unintentional outcome of this work is to be able to reinforce and create a new bond between these fathers and sons that can really help alleviate some of the other underlying tensions that can be the source of violence and dispute at home. And so it's wonderful to be able to see some of this work really deal with deep root causes of gender-based violence.
Yeah, and it always takes me back to, Shadika's tagline, when she leads, change follows.
Yeah.
The groundswell, sort of this ripple effect, and it's really great to see it practically play out through real initiatives. And
absolutely.
So fantastic. All right, so we touched on this a little bit in some of the previous questions, but we know that the pandemic was a huge disruptor. And the after effects of it still continue. In fact, you talked about how, in the mindset is also, how do we continue to live it? How do we continue to survive the pandemic? We know that girls' education already faces significant gaps in access and other barriers, and that Shadika, in partnership with local partners, is addressing some of those issues. We just talked about the Gender-Based Violence Initiative as one of them. So how is the work further impacted when you have continued disruptors, right? We have the pandemic. You talked about natural disasters. India just recently continues to experience a lot of flooding, and the disasters that continue after that. And these continue to create more barriers. So what kind of pivots and what kind of shifts have made Shadika successful in trying to stay on task throughout all of these different changing circumstances?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think rather than pivot, I think that what the pandemic has taught us is to go deeper into our beliefs, our values, and the way that we want to do the work. When you're on lockdown and you can't travel to see one another, it's so important to be able to have access to digital technology, not just the software, not just the hardware, but also the software and then the skills, right? But you can only do so much. And what it's really pushed us here at Shattuck is to trust our partners, to trust our scholars, to do the hard work on the ground, and for us to be very clear about what is it that we bring to the table to support them. And what we've seen after 2 years of pandemic, and in the annual report and the data of success that we have been able to see to capture, is that it's the right way of doing the work. That the number of girls who graduate from high school, the number of girls who graduate from college, still being in the 90%, and if not the 100%. The level of confidence that they have, the level, not the amount of community service that they do, that has not declined at all, even with us pulling back and not being as involved on the ground, right? And providing unrestricted funds and not having to watch so closely if they've spent the money on this or that, because they know better how to allocate their time and resources to make the most difference, and in order to be able to respond to the needs that they see on the ground. So that's the first thing. The second thing that I would say is that what it highlighted for us is how important it is for our model to look the way that it does. Namely, that we not only give scholarships to these young women, but we also give funding to partner organizations that they are affiliated with, and that combination is a winning combination. Because when Shattuck could not be on the ground, and we'll never be able to be on the ground, but during the pandemic, especially when we could not be on the ground, our partner organizations were kind of their first line of defense if anything went wrong at home, right? And for these young women, they come from circumstances that are such that if something goes wrong at home, it can derail their entire plans for college. And so having that, those partner organizations who can be true allies in the communities, who know these families intimately, who can speak in their language, both linguistically, but also a language that makes terminology that makes the families feel comfortable and trusting. Without that presence, so many of our scholars may not have been able to stay in school, and they say it themselves, and it comes out in the surveys that we receive when we ask them what are the top factors that have allowed them to stay strong and resilient and stay in school. They very, very often, amongst the top 2 or 3 choices, they name their partner organizations as being key. And so I think that once again, after the pandemic, was a huge confirmation that model is a winning model. The other thing that I would say is that as much as the scholarship program is focused on the scholars being able to have academic success, we also put a lot of emphasis on the leadership skills and the emotional health that it takes to be able to be the type of leader that these young women aspire to be. And so it's continuing to do a lot of character building for them to feel strong, for them to be able to feel so that they can have the determination and the resilience to overcome challenges that will come their way. Because like you said, it's never going to stop. If it's not a natural disaster, it might be the next pandemic. If it's not the next pandemic, it might be things that happen in their personal lives. And so teaching them that grit giving them an awareness of all the resources around them for them to be able to overcome future challenges is a big part of other program activities that we have at Sharga outside of just the grant making that we do.
I mean, you describe such a great, I'm sitting here thinking, like, we live in the US, and there aren't programs that are as sophisticated or as flexible or as progressive in the way that, I currently, my role entails a federal grant, and there's just no room for flexibility and maneuverability, right? And what you're saying is so transformational. It almost seems like the US is a little bit behind of the times, and it's so essential to sort of allow that space to trust the local partners, to know their populations, to know their communities, and to tailor their programming to meet the needs of the populations and demographics that they're serving. And I think it speaks volumes that you're doing this kind of transformational work, even from someone working here.
And I have to tell you that idea is not even that new or innovative, because in the world of science, or in the R&D world, you would never speak on behalf of the experts just because you had the money, right? It's like, if you're trying to create a space shuttle, you would never, just because you had the money, you would never speak on behalf of astronauts and space scientists, right? And so why is it that in this sector, we can't trust the communities with being able to be the experts in identifying their needs and creating the solutions? They're the expert in their lived experience, right? And so it's not even that crazy of an idea. It's an idea that is applied in so many other sectors. We just need to apply it here too.
Yeah, and not only are you applying it, you're showing that it works.
It does work.
That is the sort of the recipe for success, for lack of better words. But it does work. So I guess to end, how can individuals far removed from the context within which Shatika's partners work, folks here in the United States, for example, how do we support the journey towards this vision? How do we continue to support this work?
The first thing that I would say is be open to learning, right? And stay aware and informed about what's going on in other places, because like you were saying, there's actually quite a bit of parallel between what we're trying to do here at Shatika and all the things that are happening in our backyard here in the US. And so I think that that's the first thing that I would say is subscribe to Shatika's newsletter, to all of our social media channels, but also be curious about what else is happening in India, who else is doing this type of work. There's so much wonderful work that's happening on the ground. And so the first step is just to stay in the loop and pay attention. The other thing is to give, and it sounds a bit self-serving, but it's not, in the sense that when we're so far away, sometimes wanting to get our hands dirty to help with the actual work creates more work for organizations like Shatika, but also organizations on the ground, to create that opportunity for you to be involved. And that is time and resources that's taken away from the work that they could do in the communities, just to make sure that you feel good about your involvement, right? And it would be so much more effective for you to make a donation either to us at Shatika or directly to these organizations if you're able to find the channels, because it's actually quite hard to give money to India right now. So that having access to those funds, we can do the work that much faster, and that we're not spending time trying to create something just for you. And so it's a little bit parking our ego to the side and really doing something that's purpose driven and that will make the most impact. And so give as little or as much as you can. Now is really the time after the pandemic to invest generously in women and girls, because we know that during the pandemic they were more impacted than men and boys if you hold everything else equal. And so in order to be able to regain all of the terrain that has been lost, we need to invest even more in women and girls to make sure that we can hold that line for them. But don't underestimate the value of a small gift as well, right? $6 is a strong internet connection for a month, right? And so not even the drink of a latte, now that with inflated prices, not even the price of a latte, a young woman can go to school, can have access to peer support, and can have access the resources that she needs to be healthy, to be strong, and to be informed. And so don't underestimate the power of a small gift as well.
That's great. I love that you gave everyone tangible resources, and I would just echo Lee's sentiment to please give and learn more and stay engaged. This is an issue that, you know, should be at the forefront of everyone's mind and learning. So thank you. This was great. I enjoyed our conversation so much, and
absolutely
I look forward to all of Shadika's work yet to come.
Thank you so much for making the time to chat with me, and don't miss out on our annual report that will be available on our website in the coming weeks. Thank you so much for your time.